The scavenger's Discovery Marcus Torres floated in the cramped cockpit of his salvage vessel, watching the crimson mists of the nebula swirl around his ship like ghostly fingers. His weathered hands gripped the controls as he navigated through the dangerous cloud of cosmic dust and debris. Most pilots avoided the crimson nebula, calling it a graveyard where ships went to die. But Marcus wasn't most pilots. He was a scavenger, and graveyards were where he made his living. The scanner beeped softly, detecting another piece of wreckage ahead. Marcus had been working this sector for 3 days, picking through the bones of ancient battles. His cargo hold was nearly full of salvaged components and rare metals, enough to keep him fed for another month. But as he approached the new contact, something made him pause. The signature was massive, far larger than any civilian vessel or standard warship. Through the swirling red mist, a shadow began to take shape. Marcus felt his breath catch in his throat as the outline became clearer. It was a dreadnought, one of the massive warships from the old hegemony fleet. These ships were legends, built during humanity's first expansion into the galaxy over 2 centuries ago. Most had been destroyed in the great wars that followed, their technology lost to time. The ship hung motionless in space, its hull scarred and pitted from decades of floating through the nebula. Sections were torn open, exposing twisted metal and darkened corridors to the void. But even in its damaged state, the vessel radiated an aura of power and menace. This was no ordinary find. Marcus activated his communications array and ran a deep scan of the derelict. The computer identified it as the HSS Void Reaper, a Titan-class dreadnought that had vanished during the Battle of Kepler Station 200 years ago. According to the records, it had been presumed destroyed along with its entire battle group, but here it was, drifting like a sleeping giant in the nebula's embrace. As Marcus maneuvered his salvage ship closer, memories surfaced unbidden. He had once served aboard ships like this, back when he was Lieutenant Marcus Torres of the Colonial Defense Force. That was before the court-martial, before his disgrace, before he became just another drifter scraping by on the edges of civilized space. The sight of the massive warship brought back images of gleaming corridors, disciplined crews, and the pride he had once felt wearing the uniform. Those days were long gone. Now he was just Wrench Torres, a nickname earned through years of coaxing life from dying machines. His reputation as an engineer was solid among the salvage crews and freight runners, but respectable society wanted nothing to do with a disgraced officer. Most days, Marcus tried not to think about what he had lost, but seeing the Void Reaper floating before him like a monument to fallen glory, the old wounds felt fresh again. Marcus docked his small vessel to one of the dreadnought's maintenance bays using magnetic clamps to secure the connection. The airlock cycled with a wheeze of ancient machinery, and he stepped into the massive ship wearing a full environmental suit. His helmet lights cut through the darkness, revealing corridors that stretched away into shadow. The scale was breathtaking. The main passages were wide enough for entire crews to march through, and the ceiling disappeared into darkness above. Emergency lighting flickered weakly along the walls, powered by backup systems that had somehow survived 2 centuries in space. The air was stale and thin, but Marcus's instruments detected no immediate toxins. As he explored deeper into the ship, Marcus began to understand what he had found. The Void Reaper wasn't just damaged, it had been abandoned in haste. Personal belongings were scattered through the corridors, and workstations showed signs of interrupted maintenance. Whatever had happened during that long-ago battle, the crew had evacuated quickly, leaving their ship to drift into the nebula. But the ship's bones were solid. The main hull was intact, and most of the critical systems appeared salvageable. The fusion reactors were cold but undamaged. The weapon systems were offline but complete, and the navigation computers still held their ancient star charts. This wasn't just a salvage find, it was a complete warship waiting to be reborn. Marcus made his way to the bridge, a vast command center that once coordinated the firepower of an entire fleet. The captain's chair sat empty, surrounded by dark screens and silent consoles. As he approached the main computer terminal, something unexpected happened. A section of the panel flickered to life, displaying text in the old hegemony script. Unauthorized personnel detected. Identity verification required. Marcus stared at the screen in amazement. The ship's computer was still active, running on minimal power after all these years. He entered his old military identification codes, wondering if they would still be recognized by the ancient system. To his surprise, the computer accepted them, and more systems began coming online. Welcome aboard, Lieutenant Torres. Ship status. Critical. Awaiting orders. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. The computer still recognized his rank from 2 centuries ago, still waited for commands from officers long dead. He was no longer that young lieutenant full of dreams and honor. He was just a broken-down salvager with more regrets than credits. But as he looked around the bridge of the mighty warship, something stirred in his chest that he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Marcus began running diagnostics on the ship's systems, his engineer's mind already working on the seemingly impossible task ahead. The Void Reaper was damaged, but not destroyed. With enough time, resources, and skill, it could fly. Again, it could fight again, and perhaps in restoring this forgotten giant, Marcus could restore something of himself as well. The salvager had become something more than he had been in decades. He had become a man with a purpose. In the depths of space, surrounded by the bones of ancient glory, Marcus Torres began planning the resurrection of the most feared ship the galaxy had ever known. Rise of the Titan. 6 months had passed since Marcus first set foot aboard the Void Reaper, and the ancient dreadnought was slowly coming back to life. What had started as a one-man salvage operation had grown into something far more ambitious. Marcus had quietly recruited a crew of specialists, each one an outcast or exile with skills that couldn't be found in respectable society. Zara Okafor was the first to join him. The brilliant fusion engineer had been blacklisted from the corporate worlds after refusing to design weapons for civilian targets. Her dark skin bore the ritual scars of her home world, and her eyes held the fierce intelligence that had made her legendary among her peers. When Marcus offered her the chance to work on technology that predated the modern era, she couldn't resist. Next came Viktor Petrov, a weapons specialist who had served in 3 different planetary militias before. Going independent, the bear of a man had cybernetic implants replacing his left arm and eye, souvenirs from a battle that had claimed his entire unit. His knowledge of military hardware was encyclopedic, and his loyalty absolute once given. The strangest addition was Kess, an alien engineer from the Voidwalker species, standing nearly 8 feet tall with chitinous plates covering his elongated frame. Kess communicated through a translation device that rendered his clicking language into heavily accented standard. His people were master shipwrights, and he had been exiled for sharing their secrets with other species. Marcus didn't care about his past crimes, only his abilities. Together, they worked in the deepest sections of the Crimson Nebula, using the cosmic interference to hide their activities from the scanning arrays of passing ships. The Void Reaper became their home and workshop, its vast hangar bays converted into fabrication centers where they slowly rebuilt what time had taken apart. The ship's AI, which had identified itself as Artemis, proved to be an invaluable ally. The artificial intelligence had been dormant for 2 centuries, but its core programming remained intact. Artemis possessed the accumulated knowledge of the old hegemony's greatest military minds, tactical databases that modern strategists could only dream of accessing. Marcus spent countless hours interfacing with Artemis, learning the ship's capabilities, while sharing his own knowledge of modern technology. The AI was curious about the changes that had occurred during its long sleep, fascinated by advances in quantum mechanics and gravitational manipulation that hadn't existed during its original service. The fusion reactors were the first major system they restored. Zara worked tirelessly to purge 2 centuries of accumulated radiation and replace corroded components with modern equivalents. When the massive engines finally ignited, the entire ship shuddered as power flowed through conduits that had been cold for longer than most civilizations had existed. Victor focused on the weapon systems, marveling at the raw destructive potential built into the ancient warship. The Void Reaper mounted plasma cannons that could crack planetary shields, torpedo launchers capable of saturating entire star systems, and defensive systems that could deflect attacks from multiple directions simultaneously. Much of the technology was superior to anything in current military arsenals. Kess worked on the ship's structure and life support systems, his species' natural understanding of spacecraft engineering proving invaluable. Under his guidance, they sealed hull breaches, restored atmospheric processors, and rebuilt the internal transportation networks that allowed rapid movement through the massive vessel. As the months passed, the ship began to feel alive again. Lights illuminated corridors that had been dark for centuries. The hum of machinery replaced the tomb-like silence. Environmental systems cycled fresh air through passages where only the void had existed before. But their greatest challenge came when Artemis announced that the ship was ready for its first test flight in 200 years. Marcus stood on the restored bridge, surrounded by displays showing system status and spatial coordinates. His crew took their positions at stations throughout the massive command center, dwarfed by the scale of the ancient warship. The engines engaged with a deep thrumming that vibrated through the ship's bones. Slowly, majestically, the Void Reaper broke free from the nebula that had hidden it for so long. As they cleared the cosmic dust clouds, Marcus felt a surge of triumph unlike anything he had experienced since his disgrace decades earlier. The ship performed flawlessly during its trials. Acceleration was smooth and powerful. The artificial gravity maintained perfect stability, and all systems responded instantly to commands. But their celebration was short-lived. Within hours of their emergence from the nebula, long-range sensors detected multiple ships converging on their position. Word had leaked about their activities. Perhaps a merchant vessel had spotted unusual energy signatures, or maybe corporate spies had traced the unusual component purchases Marcus had been making. Regardless of how it happened, their secret was out, and every military force and pirate fleet in the sector wanted to claim the legendary dreadnought for themselves. First to arrive was a squadron of corporate security vessels, sleek cruisers bristling with modern weapons and advanced shields. Their commander, Admiral Hayes, transmitted a demand for immediate surrender on all frequencies. The Void Reaper was too valuable to be left in the hands of criminals and outcasts. Marcus stood in the captain's chair that had once belonged to heroes and legends. His crew looked to him for guidance, their faces reflecting both fear and determination. Through the main view screen, he could see the approaching warships, their weapons already powering up for combat. Artemis spoke through the bridge speakers, its synthetic voice carrying an undertone of anticipation that seemed almost eager. The AI had been built for war, and after 2 centuries of enforced peace, it was ready to remember its purpose. The battle that followed became the stuff of legend throughout the galaxy. The corporate forces expected to face a barely functional derelict, crewed by desperate salvagers. Instead, they encountered a fully operational war machine from humanity's golden age, commanded by engineers who understood its capabilities better than anyone alive. The Void Reaper's plasma cannons spoke with voices of thunder, each blast punching through enemy shields like they were made of paper. Torpedoes streaked across space in perfect formations, guided by targeting systems that had been perfected in the fires of ancient conflicts. The ship's defensive arrays deflected incoming fire with contemptuous ease, energy barriers that had protected humanity's greatest fleets now serving a crew of outcasts and exiles. Within an hour, the corporate squadron was fleeing in disarray, their survivors broadcasting warnings throughout the galaxy about the return of the legendary dreadnought. But Marcus knew this was only the beginning. Word would spread quickly, and every faction with military ambitions would come seeking to claim or destroy the ship that had humiliated the corporate security forces. As the Void Reaper settled into a patrol orbit around a nearby asteroid field, Marcus reflected on what they had accomplished. They had taken something abandoned and forgotten, something left to rot in the depths of space, and turned it into the most feared vessel in known space. The galaxy had written off the old ways, dismissing the achievements of previous generations as primitive and obsolete. But Marcus and his crew had proven that sometimes the old ways were better, that human ingenuity and determination could breathe life into even the most hopeless situations. Standing on the bridge of his reborn warship, surrounded by the best crew he had ever served with, Marcus Torres was no longer just a disgraced salvager. He had become something the galaxy hadn't seen in centuries, the captain of a true dreadnought, master of a weapon that could reshape the balance of power among the stars. The Void Reaper was no longer a relic of the past. It was the herald of a new age, and Marcus would make sure the galaxy remembered why humanity had once ruled the stars. The galaxy remembers. 3 weeks after the defeat of the corporate security squadron, the entire galaxy buzzed with news of the impossible. The legendary Void Reaper had returned from the dead, commanded by a mysterious crew that had humiliated one of the most powerful military forces in known space. Every holonet broadcast carried speculation about the identity of the ship's captain and the location of their hidden base. Marcus stood in the observation deck of his restored dreadnought, watching distant stars wheel slowly past the reinforced windows. The ship was no longer hiding in the Crimson Nebula. Instead, it patrolled the outer rim territories, making its presence known to anyone brave enough to challenge it. Word of their victory had spread like wildfire, and with it came both opportunity and danger. The first to approach them were the forgotten colonies, worlds that had been abandoned by the major powers as unprofitable or too dangerous to defend. Their representatives came bearing offers of alliance and pleas for protection. Marcus listened to their stories of corporate exploitation, pirate raids, and government neglect with growing anger. These were the same injustices that had led to his own disgrace decades earlier. Captain Nira Vasquez was typical of these emissaries. The leader of the Frontier Coalition represented 12 mining worlds that barely scraped by under corporate taxation. Her weathered face showed the hard lines of someone who had fought losing battles for too long, but her eyes still held the spark of hope that had brought her across half the galaxy. "We've heard what you did to Hayes and his fleet," she said, sitting across from Marcus in the ship's conference room. "The colonies are willing to offer you supply contracts, safe harbors, and intelligence networks in exchange for protection. We can't pay much in credits, but we have resources the major powers need." Marcus studied the holographic displays showing the locations of her worlds. They formed a rough arc along the galactic rim, strategically positioned to control several major trade routes. More importantly, they represented millions of people who had been written off by the powers that claimed to represent humanity's interests. "What makes you think we're interested in playing politics?" Marcus asked. "We're salvagers and engineers, not revolutionaries." Nira's smile was bitter. "Because you chose to fight Hayes instead of surrendering to him. Because you could have sold this ship to the highest bidder and retired wealthy. But instead you're out here making yourself a target. That tells me you care about more than just profit." She was right, and Marcus knew it. The moment he had chosen to restore the Void Reaper instead of stripping it for parts, he had committed himself to something larger than personal gain. The ship represented the best of humanity's past, and perhaps the key to its future. Over the following days, similar delegations arrived from across the galaxy. Independent traders offered smuggling routes and black market contacts. Mercenary companies sought employment contracts. Even some regular military officers, disgusted with corporate policies, made discreet inquiries about joining his crew. But not everyone who came seeking the Void Reaper had peaceful intentions. The Hegemony Restoration Movement, a militant organization that wanted to rebuild the old empire, sent Admiral Corvin Drake with an entire battle fleet. The silver-haired veteran had once served aboard ships like the Void Reaper, and he believed the ancient dreadnought should be the flagship of humanity's return to greatness. "That ship belongs to humanity's rightful heirs," Drake declared over the communication link, his fleet maintaining attack formation just outside weapons range, "not to criminals and outcasts who don't understand its true significance. Surrender it now, and I'll ensure you receive honorable treatment." Marcus felt his crew tense around him on the bridge. Drake's force included 6 heavy cruisers and a dozen destroyers, modern ships with sophisticated weapons and trained crews. It was a formidable armada, but Marcus had learned not to underestimate the capabilities of his ancient warship. Artemis provided tactical analysis through the bridge displays, highlighting weaknesses in the enemy formation and suggesting attack vectors. The AI had spent weeks studying modern military doctrine, adapting centuries-old strategies to counter contemporary tactics. Its conclusions were both reassuring and terrifying. "We can defeat them, Artemis reported in its synthesized voice. "But the cost in lives will be significant. Admiral Drake's crews include many competent officers who might serve humanity better alive than dead." Marcus nodded slowly. He had no desire to slaughter fellow humans who genuinely believed they were fighting for the greater good, but he also couldn't allow the Void Reaper to fall into the hands of zealots who would use it to impose their vision on the galaxy by force. "Admiral Drake," Marcus transmitted, "I'll make you a counteroffer. Single combat between our ships. Winner takes all. Loser withdraws permanently. Your modern flagship against my ancient relic. Prove that the new ways are superior to the old." The challenge hung in space between the two fleets like a gauntlet thrown down before kings. Drake's response came after several minutes of heated discussion among his officers. "Agreed. But know that when I defeat you, that ship will serve the cause of human supremacy as it was meant to." The duel that followed became one of the most watched events in galactic history. Both fleets withdrew to safe distances while the two massive warships closed to combat range. Drake's flagship, the Iron Resolve, was a masterpiece of modern engineering, bristling with quantum weapons and protected by adaptive shields that could deflect almost any known attack. But the Void Reaper was something beyond known. Its weapons had been forged in the fires of humanity's first galactic war. Its defenses tested against enemies that no longer existed. When the ancient plasma cannons spoke, they did so with the accumulated wisdom of generations of human warriors. The battle lasted less than 10 minutes. Drake's modern shields collapsed under the sustained barrage of weapons that operated on principles his engineers didn't fully understand. His quantum torpedoes struck barriers that had been designed to stop attacks from civilizations that made the current galaxy seem primitive by comparison. As the Iron Resolve drifted powerless in venting atmosphere, Marcus transmitted rescue coordinates to Drake's fleet. He had proven his point without unnecessary killing, demonstrating that the old ways still had value in a galaxy that had forgotten its roots. In the months that followed, the legend of the Void Reaper grew beyond all proportion. Pirates fled at the first sign of its approach. Corporate fleets gave it wide berth. Independent worlds began declaring themselves under its protection, forming a loose confederation that stretched across dozens of star systems. Marcus found himself reluctantly accepting the role of leader that had been thrust upon him. The salvager, who had once been content to scrape by on the edges of civilization, now commanded the respect of millions and the fear of the galaxy's power brokers. Standing once again on the observation deck, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. He had taken something that the galaxy had written off as worthless and turned it into a symbol of hope and strength. The Void Reaper was no longer just a ship. It was proof that humanity's greatest achievements lay not in abandoning the past, but in learning from it. The stars wheeled overhead in their eternal dance, indifferent to the affairs of mortals. But among those distant suns, word spread of the man who had refused to let greatness die, who had taken humanity's forgotten glory and made it live again. Marcus Torres was no longer just a salvager or even a ship captain. He had become something the galaxy desperately needed, a reminder that from the ashes of the past could rise the power to shape the future. The Void Reaper sailed on through the darkness, carrying with it the hopes of all who believed that humanity's greatest days were not behind them, but yet to come. In the deepest archives of the ship's memory banks, Artemis cataloged every battle, every victory, every moment of triumph that had restored its purpose. The ancient AI had been built to serve humanity's expansion among the stars, and now it served that mission once again, guided by a crew that understood that true power came not from conquest, but from the courage to stand against those who would oppress the innocent. The galaxy had tried to forget the lessons of its past, dismissing the achievements of previous generations as outdated and irrelevant. But Marcus and his crew had proven that sometimes the old ways were not just better, they were necessary. In a universe where might too often made right, the Void Reaper stood as a testament to the idea that those forgotten and left behind could rise again to claim their place among the stars. The most feared ship in the galaxy sailed on, no longer a relic of the past, but a herald of the future, commanded by the man who had refused to let it rot in the darkness of space.